My parents sent me to an orphanage when I was little, and when I built a career, I suddenly became important to them. Hi Reddit. I guess I never thought I'd be sharing my story here, but life can take such wild turns that sometimes you just need to unload it all somewhere. My name's Grace. I'm 22 now, but the story I'm about to share started when I was 14. Buckle up. It's a ride I wouldn't wish on anyone. When I was 14, my parents told me they were putting me and my brother Aaron into foster care. They didn't sit us down gently or explain with heartfelt reasoning. It was more like a sudden, sharp stab. They said, "We can't support the family anymore. You'll have a better chance in foster care." I remember sitting there, my chest tightening as I tried to make sense of the words. Aaron, who was 16 then, just stared at them in disbelief. I don't think I truly understood what they meant until the social workers came the next day. They packed our things, barely even glancing at us, and told us to be good kids. I remember clinging to the doorframe of our house as they pried me away. I kept yelling, "Please, don't leave us." My parents didn't even look back. It wasn't until a month later, through social media of all places, that I discovered the truth. My parents weren't struggling financially. They were traveling the world, blogging about their adventures. Pictures of them sipping cocktails in Paris, hiking through Patagonia, and cruising in yachts filled my screen. Each photo was a knife twisting deeper into my chest. They'd abandoned us, plain and simple. Aaron tried to shield me from the pain. He'd say, "Forget them, Grace. We've got each other." But we didn't, not really. Aaron turned 18 a couple of years later and aged out of the system. That left me truly alone. That's how I ended up with the Johnson family. At first, I didn't want to trust them. I mean, would you? After what my parents pulled, I figured everyone would eventually abandon me. But the Johnsons were different. Melissa and Tom Johnson, my foster parents, were warm, kind. They didn't treat me like a burden. They made me feel like I belonged. Melissa was a nurse, always rushing off to help people, but she'd still find time to ask how my day went or sit with me during dinner. Tom was quieter but steady, like a rock you could lean on. They had two biological kids, Emma, who was 12, and Jake, who was 9. Emma and I shared a room, and though she was a bit shy at first, we bonded quickly over silly late-night talks and baking cookies in the kitchen. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I decided then and there that I wouldn't let my parents' betrayal define me. I threw myself into school, spending hours buried in books or practicing speeches for debate club. Melissa and Tom noticed and encouraged me every step of the way. Melissa even took me shopping for a blazer when I made it to the state debate finals. She said, "You're going to knock their socks off." And I did. I won first place. But success came with its own set of challenges. Some of the other kids at school, especially the popular ones, weren't thrilled about a foster kid showing them up. They'd whisper things like, "She's only smart because she's trying to make up for being trash." It hurt, but I pushed through. I told myself I was proving them, and my parents, wrong. Just when I thought life was finally stabilizing, I got a letter. It was from my parents. The letter started off casually, like they hadn't abandoned me at all. "Dear Grace, we hope this letter finds you well." It went on about how they missed me and Aaron, how they were thinking of visiting us soon, as though they hadn't ghosted us for years. I crumpled the letter halfway through reading it and threw it into the trash. But a part of me, the part that still craved their love, dug it out that night and smoothed it back out. I read it again, tears streaming down my face. I didn't respond. I couldn't. One day, Aaron showed up at the Johnsons' house. He was taller than I remembered, with a scruffy beard and a tired look in his eyes. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "I missed you, Gracie." I cried into his shoulder, but something felt off. He wasn't the same carefree brother I'd known. Aaron stayed for dinner, charming Melissa and Tom with stories of his travels and work. But later that night, he pulled me aside and asked for money. Not much at first, just enough for a bus ticket. I gave it to him, no questions asked. But the requests kept coming, and they grew larger. I started to suspect he was in trouble. One day, I overheard a phone call. Aaron was talking to someone about owing money and fixing things soon. My stomach dropped. I confronted him, and he broke down, confessing that he'd gotten tangled up in some dangerous debts. He swore he'd pay me back. I didn't know whether to believe him. Everything came crashing down when Melissa and Tom found out I'd been sneaking money to Aaron. They weren't angry, but they were hurt. Melissa sat me down and said, "Grace, we love you, but we can't let you jeopardize your future for someone who's making bad choices." I felt torn. On one hand, Aaron was my blood, my only connection to the life I'd lost. On the other hand, The Johnsons had given me stability, love, and hope when I had none. I didn't know who to choose. Things reached a boiling point when Aaron disappeared. He stopped answering his phone, and I had no idea where he'd gone. The police found his car abandoned a few weeks later, but there was no sign of him. I blamed myself. If I'd given him more, maybe he wouldn't have gotten in so deep. If I'd refused him, maybe he would have found another way. The uncertainty gnawed at me. Melissa, ever the nurturing spirit, hugged me tightly one night and said, "You can't save everyone, Grace. But you can save yourself." That hit me hard. I realized I'd been trying to fix my parents' mistakes by holding on to Aaron, but I couldn't keep bleeding for people who didn't want to heal. I had to focus on myself. So, I kept studying. I applied for scholarships and got into a great college. The Johnsons cheered me on every step of the way, even when I doubted myself. But I still think about Aaron sometimes. I wonder where he is, if he's safe, if he remembers the sister who tried to save him. I used to think I'd never hear from my parents again, but their lives had a strange way of creeping back into mine. Social media became a curse and a blessing. It was how I stayed connected with the world, but it was also the window through which I learned just how little my parents thought of Aaron and me. Their blog had exploded in popularity. They were influencers now, with hundreds of thousands of followers who adored their journey of self-discovery and embracing freedom. Every post was a slap in the face. Pictures of them lounging on pristine beaches, sipping mimosas at luxury resorts, or smiling on bustling city streets made me sick. They acted like their lives had always been this perfect, like their children didn't exist. When I was 18 and finally out of foster care, I reached out to them, not out of hope, but out of anger. I sent them a long message, laying it all out. How they abandoned Aaron and me, how I'd spent years feeling like I wasn't good enough, how their luxurious lives were built on the rubble of our broken family. They didn't even reply. That's when I realized the truth. I couldn't count on them. Not for love, not for support, not even for an acknowledgement of their mistakes. They had chosen their path, and I had to choose mine. I knew I had to make something of myself, not for them, but for me. My hard work in high school paid off. I won a full scholarship to a prestigious university. When the acceptance letter arrived, I cried in the bathroom for an hour. It wasn't just relief, it was validation. The Johnsons threw me a small celebration, complete with a cake that said, "The future is bright." Melissa hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. I moved to campus in the fall. It was overwhelming at first. Dorm life, navigating classes, and trying to fit in with peers who seemed to come from entirely different worlds. Most of them had parents who helped move them in, parents who called every day to check on them. My phone stayed silent, except for the occasional text from Melissa or Tom. To make ends meet, I took on a part-time job at a local marketing firm. It was supposed to be an internship, but they ended up offering me a paid position. Earning $35,000 a year while still in school felt like a small miracle. I worked tirelessly, balancing my job, classes, and social life, or what little of it I had. The company was run by a woman named Clara, who became an unlikely mentor to me. Clara was sharp, no nonsense, and fiercely independent. She reminded me of who I wanted to be. One day, after a particularly grueling project, she said, "Grace, you're too smart to just work for someone else your whole life. What's your dream?" I didn't know how to answer at first. Then it hit me. I wanted to help people, not in a vague, feel-good way, but in a practical, actionable way. Growing up, I'd watched my parents make horrible financial decisions. I'd seen families in the foster system struggle because they didn't have the tools or knowledge to get ahead. What if I could change that? I started small. I created a blog about financial literacy, writing posts about budgeting, saving, and managing debt. It was just a side project at first, something I worked on between classes and work shifts. But it gained traction faster than I expected. People started commenting, sharing their stories, and asking for advice. By the end of my first year in college, the blog had over 10,000 subscribers. That's when I decided to turn it into a full-fledged business. I called it Money Made Simple. I roped in Clara for advice and even convinced one of my classmates, Ryan, to help me with the tech side. Ryan was a bit of a genius when it came to coding, and he built a sleek website that looked professional and user-friendly. We added features like free budgeting tools, downloadable templates, and even a forum where people could share tips and experiences. It didn't take long for the business to take off. Within a few months, we were offering paid webinars and one-on-one coaching sessions. By the time I turned 19, Money Made Simple was earning more than I ever dreamed possible. But success brought its own challenges. One of the first shocks came from Ryan. He'd been my biggest supporter in the early days, But as the business grew, so did his ego. He started demanding more control, claiming that his tech skills were the backbone of our success. I tried to reason with him, but it became clear he wanted more than a partnership. He wanted ownership. Things escalated during a heated argument where he accused me of using him. I was stunned. I'd always thought of him as a friend, someone who believed in the mission as much as I did. But in that moment, I saw the truth. He didn't care about the mission. He cared about the money. I made the tough decision to buy him out. It cost me nearly everything I'd saved from the business, but I couldn't let it crumble because of one person's greed. The next shock came from my parents. Out of nowhere, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was my mom. "Grace, it's so good to hear your voice," she said, as if we'd just spoken yesterday. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. She launched into some story about how they were in between projects and needed help. Translation: they were out of money and saw me as their safety net. For the first time in my life, I said no. My mom didn't take it well. She accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting my family. The irony of her words was almost too much to bear. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Despite everything, I kept moving forward. Money Made Simple continued to grow, and I started getting invitations to speak at events and write guest articles for major publications. At one conference, a woman approached me in tears, saying my blog had helped her get out of debt and start a savings plan for her kids. Moments like that reminded me why I started this journey. It wasn't about proving my parents wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could build a life that mattered. I never imagined my parents would try to come back into my life after everything they'd done. Yet here they were, finding new ways to stir up chaos. It started subtly, an occasional comment under one of my social media posts or a random email that I'd delete without reading. But their attempts grew more aggressive as my business gained attention. One day, I woke up to find my parents had launched a bizarre social media campaign aimed at reuniting our family. They painted themselves as victims, claiming they had been forced to make impossible choices and were ready to reconcile. They conveniently left out the part where they abandoned me and Aaron for years, traveling the world without a second thought. Their posts gained traction. Sympathy from strangers who didn't know the real story, people urging me to forgive and forget. At first, I ignored it. Then, I started receiving messages from followers of my financial literacy platform asking why I wasn't responding to my parents' public pleas. It was infuriating. The final straw came when they threatened legal action. They claimed I had defamed them by discussing my childhood in interviews and articles. It was a thinly veiled attempt to control the narrative. My lawyer, Mark, a sharp, no-nonsense guy who had been recommended by Clara, assured me there was no case. "They're grasping at straws, Grace," he said. Still, the stress was overwhelming. What my parents didn't anticipate was how their antics would backfire. As more people dug into their past, the truth started to emerge. Former neighbors, friends, and even a few of their old blogging acquaintances began sharing their own stories about my parents' selfish behavior. Their reputation, which they had spent years crafting, unraveled rapidly. As if the chaos with my parents wasn't enough, I got an email from Aaron out of the blue. The subject line read, "I need help." I hadn't heard from Aaron in years. After he disappeared during my time with the Johnsons, I tried to track him down but came up empty. Now, here he was, reaching out. His email was short and frantic. He explained that our parents had sent him to a strict boarding school when he was 17. He described it as more of a prison than a school, with rigid rules and harsh punishments. He had managed to escape once but was caught and brought back. Now, at 24, he was still under their thumb, working for one of their projects while living under constant surveillance. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Aaron, my goofy, carefree older brother, was trapped in some dystopian nightmare orchestrated by our parents. I replied immediately, telling him I'd do whatever it took to help him get out. The first step was getting more details. Aaron and I arranged a call, though he warned me it had to be quick and discreet. When we finally spoke, his voice was shaky, filled with fear. He described the boarding school as a place designed to break kids, grueling physical tasks, isolation, and psychological manipulation. He explained that after he turned 18, our parents had moved him to one of their influencer retreats. It sounded glamorous on the surface, but Aaron painted a darker picture. It was a secluded compound where young adults were trained to manage social media campaigns for influencers like our parents. He wasn't allowed to leave or contact anyone outside the compound without permission. Aaron begged me to help him escape, and I promised I would. I reached out to Mark, my lawyer, who connected me with a private investigator named Sam. Sam was a former detective, gruff but compassionate, and he immediately took Aaron's case seriously. Together, we devised a plan to get Aaron out. Sam uncovered that the compound was in a remote area in California, surrounded by dense woods and monitored by security guards. It was clear we couldn't just waltz in and ask for Aaron to leave. We needed a strategy. We decided on a two-pronged approach: legal pressure and a covert extraction. Mark filed a petition questioning the legality of Aaron's detainment, while Sam and I coordinated with Aaron to plan his escape. Aaron managed to slip me a map of the compound's layout, drawn hastily on a scrap of paper and smuggled out through a sympathetic staff member. The day of the operation was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. Aaron had arranged to be near the compound's back entrance, where Sam and I would be waiting with a rental car. Sam, always prepared, had brought along disguises and fake IDs in case we ran into trouble. Everything went smoothly at first. Aaron appeared right on time, his face pale but determined. I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with relief. We were just about to leave when a guard spotted us. "Hey, stop," he shouted, drawing attention to us. Panic set in as we bolted for the car. Aaron tripped, scraping his knee, but Sam pulled him up, barking at us to keep moving. We barely made it to the car before the guards reached us. Sam floored it, and I watched in the rearview mirror as they shouted and waved their arms in frustration. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas and food. Aaron was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but he seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. He told me more about his time at the compound: the long hours, the constant surveillance, the fear of punishment for even the smallest mistake. It broke my heart to hear what he'd been through, but I was determined to help him start over. Once we reached a safe location, we focused on rebuilding Aaron's life. I helped him get a new ID and set up a bank account. Through my business connections, I found him a job at a nonprofit that supported at-risk youth. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a purpose and a paycheck. For the first time in years, Aaron seemed happy. He moved into a small apartment and started taking online courses, dreaming of one day becoming a social worker. Our parents tried to intervene, of course. They sent threatening emails and even showed up at Aaron's workplace once, but he stood his ground. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of them. By the time I turned 22, my life looked nothing like the one I had imagined when I was that scared teenager in foster care. It wasn't easy getting here, far from it, but every struggle felt like it had led to this moment. I had built something solid, something that no one could take away from me, not even my parents. One of my biggest accomplishments was buying my first home. It was a modest yet beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, worth $450,000. I remember walking through the front door for the first time, overwhelmed by a sense of pride and disbelief. I had worked so hard for this moment, saving every spare penny from my business and job. The house wasn't just a place to live. It was proof that I could build a life on my terms. It had 3 bedrooms, an open-concept kitchen, and a small backyard where I imagined hosting barbecues with the Johnsons. Melissa and Tom had come with me to the closing, standing by my side as I signed the final papers. Melissa teared up as she handed me a set of keys. "This is just the beginning, Grace," she said. "You're going to do amazing things." Owning a home gave me a newfound sense of stability, but it also reignited a dream I'd been nurturing for years. I wanted to give back to kids in foster care, kids like me who had been dealt a tough hand but were determined to make something of themselves. That's how the Future Forward Scholarship Fund was born. I used a portion of my business profits to create scholarships for foster youth pursuing higher education or vocational training. The first year, we funded 5 scholarships. The next year, it was 10. By the third year, the fund had grown so much that I was invited to speak at a national conference about supporting foster care initiatives. Standing on that stage in front of hundreds of people, I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the opportunity, but for the people who had helped me along the way. My voice shook as I told my story, but the applause afterward reassured me that I was doing something meaningful. The recognition was flattering, but I never forgot where I came from. I kept my circle small, relying on the people I trusted most. One of those people was Clara, my former boss-turned-mentor. She had been instrumental in helping me navigate the business world, and when I told her about the scholarship fund, she offered to match donations from her own company. "Grace, you're not just building a business, you're building a legacy," she told me. Amid all this growth, my relationship with the Johnsons only deepened. They had been my rock through so many challenges, and I often found myself at their house for Sunday dinners or family game nights. Emma and Jake, their kids, were like siblings to me. Emma was in high school now, and she'd sometimes ask me for advice about boys or college plans. Jake, ever the prankster, loved teasing me about my boring business meetings. One evening, after dinner, Melissa and Tom sat me down in the living room. Melissa looked nervous, which wasn't like her. "Grace," she began, "we've been thinking about this for a long time. You're already a part of our family, but we want to make it official. We'd like to adopt you." I was stunned. Tears filled my eyes as I tried to process their words. Adoption hadn't crossed my mind. I was an adult, after all, but the thought of being officially part of their family was overwhelming. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tom smiled. "We've never been more sure of anything." The adoption process was surprisingly straightforward, given my age. During the final hearing, the judge asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood up, my hands shaking, and looked at Melissa and Tom. "You gave me a home when I didn't have one," I said. "You gave me love when I didn't think I deserved it. Thank you for showing me what a family really is." The judge smiled as he signed the paperwork. "Congratulations, Grace Johnson," he said. Hearing my new last name for the first time felt like shedding an old skin. It wasn't just about cutting ties with my biological parents. It was about embracing a future that was entirely my own. Changing my name was a cathartic experience. It was the final step in severing the last connection to the people who had hurt me the most. For years, my biological parents' name had been a shadow over my accomplishments, a reminder of the abandonment and pain they caused. But now, as Grace Johnson, I felt free. Not long after the adoption was finalized, I received a letter from my biological parents. It was filled with empty apologies and self-serving excuses. They wrote about how they missed me and wanted to rebuild our relationship. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. I expanded the scholarship fund, started hosting workshops for foster youth, and even began mentoring a few of them personally. Watching those kids succeed reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. One of the most memorable moments came when a young woman named Kayla, one of the first scholarship recipients, invited me to her college graduation. She hugged me tightly afterward, tears in her eyes. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said. Her words stayed with me long after the ceremony. They reminded me that every decision I'd made, every struggle I endured, had led to this. At 25, my life felt like it had finally come full circle. For so long, I believed personal happiness was something reserved for other people. People with stable families, easy beginnings, and smooth paths. But somehow, I found my way to it. And a big part of that happiness was Alex. I met Alex at a charity gala 2 years prior. I was there to present an award for one of my scholarship recipients, and Alex was part of a tech firm sponsoring the event. They had been assigned as my handler for the evening, making sure everything ran smoothly. What started as casual small talk turned into deep conversation about our shared passion for making a difference. By the end of the night, Alex had slipped me their business card with a note scribbled on the back. "Dinner?" Our first date was a disaster, at least by traditional standards. The restaurant had overbooked, so we ended up eating tacos on a bench in the park. But Alex made me laugh so much that I didn't care. They were kind, patient, and genuinely interested in my work. Over time, I realized how much I admired their ability to support others without trying to overshadow them. Alex became my biggest cheerleader, pushing me to dream even bigger. When I mentioned wanting to expand my scholarship fund internationally, they spent weeks helping me research potential partnerships. When I doubted my ability to speak at a major conference, they rehearsed my speech with me until I felt confident. 2 years after we met, Alex proposed in the simplest, most perfect way. We were in the backyard of the home I'd worked so hard to buy, sipping coffee on a quiet Sunday morning. They pulled out a small velvet box and said, "Grace, you've built an incredible life for yourself. I'd be honored to share it with you." I said yes, of course. The wedding was small and intimate, just the way I wanted it. The Johnsons stood in the front row, tears in their eyes as I walked down the aisle. Emma was my maid of honor, and Jake gave a hilarious toast about how he used to think I was too serious, but now realized it was just determination. Aaron was there too, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. Seeing Aaron thriving was one of the greatest joys of my life. After everything he'd been through, he had managed to rebuild himself piece by piece. With my encouragement and a lot of late-night pep talks, he went back to school, majoring in IT. He threw himself into his studies with the same determination I'd once seen in him as a kid. When Aaron graduated, I was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. He even landed a job at a prestigious tech company, something he thought would never happen. Watching him succeed felt like watching a part of myself heal. While my personal life blossomed, my work continued to grow in ways I never could have imagined. By 25, the Future Forward Scholarship Fund had become one of the most recognized initiatives for foster youth in the country. We had funded over 100 scholarships, launched mentoring programs, and even partnered with schools to provide resources for foster kids transitioning into adulthood. One of my proudest moments came when I was invited to speak before Congress about reforming the foster care system. I was nervous, terrified, even, but I knew it was an opportunity to create real change. I shared my story, the hardships and triumphs, and laid out practical steps for improving the system. After my testimony, a young woman approached me in the hallway. She was a foster youth who had aged out of the system and was struggling to find her footing. "You're the reason I still have hope," she said, tears streaming down her face. Moments like that reminded me why I did this work. As my influence grew, so did the demands on my time. Balancing my business, philanthropic efforts, and personal life was no small feat. Alex was my anchor through it all, always reminding me to take breaks and prioritize my mental health. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, Alex said, "You've done so much for foster youth, but what about yourself? When was the last time you celebrated you?" I laughed it off, but their words stuck with me. I realized that while I had poured so much energy into others, I rarely took time to acknowledge my own growth. That's when Alex suggested something bold, taking a sabbatical. The idea of stepping away from my work, even temporarily, felt impossible at first. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I needed it. Alex and I planned a 3-month trip to travel the world, a way to recharge and experience the freedom I had spent so long helping others achieve. We visited places I'd only dreamed of, the lavender fields of Provence, the bustling streets of Tokyo, the serene beaches of Bali. Each destination brought new perspectives and a deeper appreciation for the life I'd built. When we returned, I felt more energized than ever. I channeled that energy into expanding my initiatives. By 28, I had donated over $1 million to scholarships, educational programs, and advocacy efforts for foster youth. The work wasn't just about money. It was about creating opportunities for kids like me to dream bigger. One of my most ambitious projects was launching a mentorship program that paired foster youth with professionals in their desired fields. Watching those connections flourish was incredibly rewarding. The culmination of my efforts came when I was featured on the cover of a major magazine as one of the top 100 changemakers. The article highlighted not just my work, but the lives it had touched, kids who had gone on to college, started businesses, and broken the cycle of poverty. Despite the accolades, I remained grounded. My success wasn't just mine. It belonged to the Johnsons, to Alex, to Aaron, and to every person who had believed in me along the way.